Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Policy and Curriculum Committee meeting on the 20th of December. I'm the chair of the committee, Nyla Biliu, and I'm also an at-large board member. Would everybody mind introducing themselves?
I'm Julianne Opperman, and I'm a representative from District 3.
Hi, I am Miki Bondo. I am the District 1 rep and also the vice chair of the board.
Right. And so, Tim, for your reference, Nyla, obviously, as you just heard, is the chair. Julianne and Mickey are two of the other members of the committee. We're waiting on just one of our other new board members, Yusira Ali. She is the other formal member of the committee. And then, Chair Lentz, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Sarah Lentz, pronounce her, she, hers. I'm chair of the board and at large. And I'm not on this committee. I just show up. So I don't have voting power is the summary of that.
Right. And Tim, you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. My name's Tim Mason-Osan. I'm a PEA member and teacher at King Middle School. This is my third year here at King and teaching in Portland. I go by he, him, and I'm also a non-voting member on this committee.
Right. Well, we're excited to have you join and be part of these conversations moving forward.
Thank you.
And so just for the record, I'm Aaron Townsend, Deputy Superintendent and kind of the staff point person lead for the Policy and Curriculum Committee. And then excited to have with me my colleague, Barrett. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Barrett Wilkinson. I'm the Executive Director for People and Equity, and just here because of the policies for initial discussion tonight. So I just joined sometimes. At the request of the committee.
Great. So, I mean, I think, we talked a little bit about this, Tim, but just the overview, and I've shared with you kind of the work plan docs. So I'll do just briefly, just kind of regrounding, this is the Policy and Curriculum Committee, technically under one of the standing committees, kind of under the, kind of board structure. Our work plan for this year is, kind of focusing on a little bit of shoring things up, aligned to some of our other kind of priorities in the system this year in terms of organizational coherence and kind of foundation building. So we did, an analysis around, our overall policy book and what was kind of current, what was up to date, where did we need to kind of revisit because it had been a while. So through that analysis, kind of identified a set of policies and kind of grouped them somewhat thematically to just kind of tackle them in kind of a coherent manner. And then aligned to that, identified what are some of the kind of required plans that we need to have, most of which are not like annual plans, but just to bring visibility and understanding to what those things are, just given, they haven't been discussed at the board level, many of them in my tenure, and it's been a while. So both given kind of the newness, many newer members on the board, right, and just understanding that context, we wanted to kind of bring those. So that was the other filter of kind of how we organized and, determined kind of the work plan for the year. So we have this work plan that kind of spans over the course of the year, and our goal is, to have a set that we look at 1 month. So i.e. this month, we have, kind of these 3 policies that we review. I work to get out the drafts of those, at least a week or more before the meeting, just because, they're substantive or can be. Certainly the policies themselves this time were not super long and substantive, but the attachments and just some of the informational stuff was dense. But so that we can kind of review them, we do the board members, after a discussion, and we'll go through, kind of take them one by one. There'll be a motion after discussion. There'll be a motion to kind of move it forward to the board. And then at the board level, So that's hopefully what we'll do tonight on these three policies. And then at the board level, there's a first read and workshop, which will, in our cadence, typically happens in the first meeting of the month. So that means, first read is just it's on the agenda, but we don't usually speak to it during the course of the meeting. But there's a workshop after to kind of present a little bit of the discussion and the rationale for the changes, have the chance for the full board to kind of ask questions. And then the subsequent meeting is the second read and vote. So ideally we've, are kind of all aligned by that time. At the meeting last night, for example, we approved the revisions to the truancy policy and then the restraint and seclusion policy and procedure, which we had reviewed in this committee in November. So that's kind of the cadence. And we can continue to make changes, obviously bringing forward initial draft changes to policies. Those are often in kind of working on our context where we consult with, our legal counsel about legislative updates. Drummond works with the statewide organization MSMA to kind of have a set of model policies based on recent legislation is kind of our starting point. So we have them do a review of our policies, then we discuss, right? And there may be things as well that we want to kind of change or amend. We'll look at the procedure tonight around the hiring of admin staff, and I think that's a good example where there weren't many substantive legislative or state changes, but we had some alignment in terms of aligned to our equity hiring toolkit that had some just kind of clean up or kind of that we feel like would be representative of kind of how we approach, hiring work across the district now. So we'll discuss those, kind of approve them. It might be there's times where we say, okay, it's approved, given this change, which I'd make between the policy committee and the first read. So it's not like what comes out of here has to be the thing that gets reviewed and discussed at the first read, which ultimately there's opportunities for modification as it goes through the steps in that process. So our goal is to kind of work these through to get the policy book kind of updated, and know we have a pretty aggressive set of things to kind of be working on. But knowing also that, this is the most deliberative body around the policies. But, there are opportunities for additional revisions or amendments as we go through those steps of from policy committee to first read and first read to second read in terms of what gets adopted. So that's a little bit of context on the policy and curriculum committee. Anybody else want to share anything about the committee or questions even about what I said from other members? Great. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and jump in on our first set of policies. So I didn't, I guess I realized I did put together a deck last night. I didn't put together a PowerPoint deck for this one. So I will maybe do that for workshop. But the first policy that we're, kind of have on the agenda is looking at the recruiting and hiring of administrative staff or, of administrative staff. So, first on the policy side of things, the proposed revisions that hopefully you've had a chance to review are not, are driven some by some of the legislative updates. So the most specific kind of thing that we do need to incorporate is the language in, in kind of that new or revised introductory paragraph. That includes the language around hair texture and hairstyles. So that was incorporated into some of the policy or law at the state level around the Maine human rights law. And so that kind of follows through here in this context. So that's the main kind of, that's the main legislative update around that. The current existing model policies, there's only a few other kind of changes really. So that's just a revision of that opening paragraph. And then, there are a couple of places where the language, has fallen off. There are two sentences later in the policy that, are no longer included in the model policy. So just had struck those for now. It's, had been a long time. It had been since 2007 since this had been updated. So that was kind of language from a different era a little bit. So So that's the context of the policy. Are there any questions before we go to the procedure? Because that's, I think, where things get more interesting a little bit. But go ahead, Mickey. You have...
Thank you. Maybe I will get my answer from the procedure. So can you just go a little bit about detail about the air texture then the state has put as a addition on that policy? If you
Yeah, and let me, why don't I do it this way? I'll share my screen so we can look at the actual language here. So if you see that now, and this is copied, I believe, I copied it from the model policy, which I believe is coming straight from the language in the updated statute. But it's, this parenthetical statement is the specific additional language that was incorporated, as I understand it, in the state legislation, and so is kind of following now into this policy as well.
Aaron, could I just make one change if that's possible?
Sure.
I think locks is spelled different. There's no K. It's LOC.
Oh, okay. Okay. Sure. Yeah, that's easy, friendly amendment. Mickey, I don't know. I don't have a lot more context on it than that, but just knowing that was kind of what came when I got reviewed the model policy from Drummond that was based on that legislation. So,
okay, I don't understand, but I'm just get a little confused. Why that was supposed to be a big deal for that? Well, I know there has been discrimination about the way people look, the way the hairstyle can be, something can be undermined or have a discrimination about the capacity or ability to be hired to that specific position. So,
Sarah, do you mind if I just give some context? Because I think this is because of the Crown Act, right? It's to put some context because folks probably not in Maine, but in other places were getting penalized for their hair. Like I know in Texas, there was a teen that was suspended and is still suspended because of his locks. And so he even when he came back to school, he was like put in a temporary school situation and then suspended again. And so I think this is creating that protection that students won't actually, be discriminated and subjected to suspension because of their hair. It sucks that obviously we have to do this and there has to be a policy that allows for people to wear their natural hair the way they want. But I think that's the context is the Crown Act has been, I think, adopted nationally, or each state takes it on depending on what they choose from the act. But yeah, I think that's the context is to update this to resemble that. And I don't know if that's what you were going to say, Sarah, but go ahead.
No, I just to agree with your interpretation there, but I had a separate question, if that's okay to move to a different. I was just curious if you knew the reasoning behind removing gender expression from the list.
I don't, and I think, and I know Barrett's review as well because I know because it maintains the gender identity. So I don't know the rationale of the change to the or expression language. So I can confirm that. Happy to maintain that. I don't.
I mean, best practice could have changed since I've looked at it last, but I think having both makes sense to me, and I would prefer to have expression added back.
Yeah, I actually didn't catch that because I think I read it before you pasted this in. I didn't catch that because I remember reading that being like, oh yeah, that's right. So I do think that's a bit of an an unnecessary exclusion in the model policy. I actually don't think there's any reason not to include it. So
Great.
that's another friendly amendment, I guess. Minor edit.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions or comments, discussion about the policy itself? Then if not, we can turn to the procedure that gets just into a little more process around, kind of how we go through the hiring process. This is really more a statement of values kind of thing. Okay. Okay, so I think if I just go to this. So, I want to acknowledge a little bit, that just following the formatting and the numbering in particular, like the numbering and the indentation, is really challenging to manage in the track changes. So this will look much cleaner in kind of a proposed final version. So some of the changes or proposed changes here you'll see are change some of the kind of numbering and ordering to kind of make it more aligned with some of how we've articulated things from the equity hiring toolkit and kind of our process, but it looks a little clumsy in the track changes here. So I'm just aware of that. I spent a long time trying to make it right, and don't know that I did not succeed. Barrett, maybe I'll let you speak to some of this, right? But, mainly I'll just give a quick overview. There are a few places we're doing some of the cleanup of the language, obviously, as you see on the screen now, from school committee to board, because again, it's been a long time in terms of how those current kinds of references. So we're always looking, Tim, just for your context, to kind of do that kind of language. We look for kind of pronoun usage. So if I've missed things, please raise those, those are other just kind of clean up things that we try and do as we review policies. But the substantive ones really don't come from any of the external or kind of legal review. There was nothing additional from the model policy or procedure, but more from our own internal kind of perspective of aligned to kind of our equity hiring toolkit. And so, Drummond has reviewed our proposed changes and is fine. There's no conflict or anything like that. So with the existing kind of proposed changes. Julianne, do you have a question before we kind of talk through a little bit about
through the whole thing, and then I'll ask my question.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say that the other, minor updates is just, we don't necessarily advertise in print media anywhere anymore. I'm not sure anyone does. So it's making some of the statements about how the process works a little more open-ended, just to reflect current process. This would, kind of link in more of what we actually do in screening, posting, screening, interviewing, hiring. And I think Aaron already said everything else. So there's a lot of pink, I know, but.
Well, perhaps I should ask my question now or comment on it. I understand why not to be specific about Maine, Sunday newspapers, et cetera, but I have a concern that we aren't reaching far enough. And granted, when you're sending it out, are you going to historically Black colleges? Are you going to the major publications, which do come in print? They may also be online, but come in print for educational journals, magazines, that sort of thing, like Ed Week, and I'm thinking the one that's a higher education one, but also might be looking for somebody that's thinking of doing something different. So I would, as deemed appropriate, my only thing on that is I hope, and it doesn't mean that it needs to be changed, but I would like to know exactly how extensive we go so that we do get the best from everywhere. And I don't know how the Maine colleges feel about us not saying them first, but that isn't necessary. But that's my thought. So in far as the wording there goes, what does appropriate mean at this point? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the positions, right? And it depends on budget. A lot of those things are incredibly cost prohibitive. So, that's all about how we target funds and what we can do. We have done, we've done a range of things in the past and, have in the works, sort of an updated plan. The majority of our successful hires don't come from very far away. We get some. And so the most successful one that we continue to do is the our education college fairs. So, we do a round of those sort of things. And we're working to develop relationships with other places, but that's really, that's how you develop those pipelines. We have tried, like attending and bringing HBCU folks here and, to develop some of those pipelines. We haven't had a ton of success. I think if we have, anything is possible. But it's about,
money.
Budget.
No, I understand that. I'm hopeful, and it would be great, like you said, to find personal relationships with some of those schools. So
Right.
that through an alumni association, perhaps,
Right.
where it's cheaper, and they can go out and dig up the people for us. So it's just, that somehow I know that's a time-consuming thing to develop, but it might be something to say to the faculty that we have,
Totally.
everybody who we have, to say, hey. So that was my concern. I just want to keep people want to come to Maine if they can afford it.
Yeah, we try that, but I mean, it is a barrier. Maine is, Portland is a hub for us and Maine, but it's a tough sell even for someone graduating from a Boston area school. We do not get many applicants from out of state. I don't know particular numbers off the top of my head, but our best pipelines are the ones we develop internally. So our ed tech to teacher pipelines, that is the most successful, particularly for increasing the representative diversity of our staff. And then education colleges in the surrounding area. We are doing at least one in Boston this year to see, because we're trying, right? Like we're always trying different things to see what might be a successful pipeline. And then on the other side of it, when we're not talking about teachers, like as deemed appropriate, if we're looking for, we're looking for a transportation director now, right? That's a different, that might be a different process that we say, like, what, our typical recruiting hasn't been working for this. What are some other places we should be looking? Or should we work with a recruiter for a particular position, or, so there's all that kind of stuff too.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And we also, I think, in each one, particularly in the administrative ones, think about networks, develop little kind of pitches, and, try and do just in like our own networking kind of word of mouth, in terms of accessing, various, whether it's alumni groups or other networks, right, to kind of get the word out. That has been a way we've been able to access some candidates as well. So, and then things that are relevant. So as deemed appropriate, like, for example, just with Tim here, and he was part of a hiring process last year at King, we obviously worked with to try and field candidates from, send our stuff out with the EL Education Network and so forth as we were trying to recruit for King specifically. So that's another example of like, where the opening and thinking about the right kind of networks to tap. Okay. Other questions about what you reviewed? I mean, maybe as opposed to kind of stepping through all of it, given our time, were there other questions or wonderings people had about the proposed revisions? Go ahead, sir. I think you're muted, Sarah.
Yeah, I'm happy to defer to committee members first, if anybody wants to speak. Okay. In the screening section, point 3, provide orientation on confidentiality and equity issues to screeners. I wonder if we could be a little bit more explicit there around equity issues, just because there is so much bias and initial discrimination that takes place in resume reviewing. Yeah, I was curious if we could be more explicit there. And then around references, I didn't see it in the hiring kit, but just again, like, how do we decide who the designee is that does those references, and is there additional training that happens around biases within reference calls? Because I think you can, very easily just look for the information you're looking for to confirm, confirmation bias there. And then I just was hoping that we could talk a little bit more about appointment versus listing a role and how the district makes that decision.
I think just to kind of take those in order, maybe, right, from provide, and equity issues to screeners. I think, we have the toolkit and a set of kind of like some training materials that we use in there. So I think it's a question of how much needs to go here versus as part of the substance of that. There could be more explicit reference, to some of the equity hiring. Kind of resources, right, that are reviewed there. We use a rubric from the equity hiring toolkit, a resume screening, paper screening rubric that comes from the equity hiring toolkit for that work, and it's always attention, but, do a brief orientation to that, or that's what I've done when we've done prepped the committee to do screening in that regard. So it's, so we do that specifically. We do the kind of review of some of the equity issues related to hiring a little bit more broadly, not just related to the paper screening. So could be a little more explicit in the, I think a little bit more language. I'd hesitate to go much deeper just because, then on the references, just to the question, have not, and I don't know, Barrett, what you'd say about the, training around references that hasn't been, kind of part of that in terms of kind of equity orientation. For administrative hires, it's generally the hiring manager that does the reference checks. So for principals, that had been me, right, doing those reference calls and checks. And for assistant principals, that's typically the principal that does those. So that is how we have managed that in terms of who the designee is. So the direct hiring manager getting that firsthand information. We have the kind of consultation process then, as that with that information to kind of come together with, and now it's kind of a large, includes the executive director now, but, to make a final decision so that information is kind of coming forward in the final decision-making process with the superintendent. So this is what the reference said, et cetera. So that's a little bit of like how it's gone in terms of just how that process has worked. I don't know, Barrett, do you want to say anything briefly about that?
I think, I don't know. I'm not sure that level of detail, even some of what's in here, I'm like, is this the level of detail for policy? Or I'm not sure. But I think that would belong in the hiring toolkit, would be, deeper practices around, equitable reference checking and, what we're looking for in that. There's a little bit in there, but, probably not even to the extent you're talking about, Sarah. So, I think that's, to me, that's a place for development as we continue to refine the toolkit. But that's where we're really pushing all the hiring materials, from that. And yeah, it's typically the hiring manager who's doing reference checks, not the committee. though there's probably occasionally exceptions to that. Because there's nothing that prohibits that necessarily. So, yeah. And then there was something else, but now I forgot.
I know Sarah, one of the questions is around appointment versus selection. I mean, we have used, our practice has been, that we prioritize doing a search, right? It's only in cases where, from a timeliness perspective, there's in time to kind of do a full search to have somebody in place, where we have appointed typically an interim person, so that then we conduct a full search once we are able to do so during kind of a regular window, kind of regular hiring window. So typically that's, last minute things, school year starting, we need to appoint somebody so that we can get school off the ground. Roe is a recent example of that. We had a summertime transition, had a search, didn't find a candidate out of that, following this process, didn't find so appointed an interim, then held a full process during kind of the hiring season when kind of the best candidates are available. Mickey?
Thank you. Can we go up on the interview process? So we just removed that language. I just need to have a little clarification. I think it's the 7th. The interview process for the people who are not qualified. So we have removed that line on the 7th, right? So that's not the one that's going to be applied to the new policy, right?
Right.
Okay. So I'm just wonder, I just want to understand. So what the process then we're going to communicate to the people then they are not selected?
I think we just moved that later into the process.
Okay.
Yeah, moved it down. I mean, kind of the move was, we think about that group of kind of screening and interviewing as kind of connected bodies of work of kind of evaluating the candidates. So that's why, kind of those two sections were consolidated as opposed to kind of those different distinct sections. And I think, so I think it goes, I'm sorry, I'm scrolling a lot here, but, there's a part at the end where we communicate to everybody, once we get here to the final candidate, notify folks that they were not selected.
So the people who apply, that language meant about the people who apply, but they didn't go through the interview, or So we don't have to notify them because they even didn't go to the interview. If they didn't go through the interview, that makes sense. I mean, we didn't select the applications to the pool of retained candidates, right? I just want to understand that process through that policy because it seems like mostly it's the HR process versus to the policy himself here. So that's a little confusing on my side. Like that process needs to be. So if we say that okay, that's the way we have to notify the people who apply went through the policy, went through the interview, but they were not retained. How do we proceed? That's my little concern. How we proceed? Because here when I see we just having the final candidates to the committee and then moving forward, but about the people who were not qualified, what we do with those people? Are we notifying them or not? That's why I get confused.
I mean, I think that's broad enough so it encompasses them too. So like the way it typically would work is like if if you and I are both candidates for a final, we're both finalists and Aaron's interviewing us and you get the job, Aaron's probably going to call me and say, listen, we went with our other top candidate. Thank you so much, blah, blah, blah. Anyone else who applied is going to get, who maybe wasn't even interviewed, they'll get a notification automatically that says, thank you so much for your interest in Portland Public Schools. We have selected other candidates. But they wouldn't know, because it's confidential, right? Like they wouldn't know where the process is at until that point.
So we're moving to the HR process with the toolkits, are we sending the message to the to the non-qualified people.
At the conclusion of the process, yes.
At the conclusion of the process, exactly. Yes. Thank you, Barrett. All right. Thank you. Mhm.
Julianne?
I guess following up on what Mickey's asking is if a person puts an application in February and they're not qualified at all, and leaving it until April, June to say, oh, you don't get it, or somehow they slip and don't get notified, which some people have told me in some of the processes, anecdotally, that, is that fair to them? I mean, to wait. I mean, if they have a potential for being qualified, yes, I can see holding on to them until you get farther along. But if you say, hey, this person is just not, why did they bother, an English teacher wanting to teach biology, or, that's not part of this, but that's the idea. So I think that, I'm not sure if that's what Mickey was talking about, but it strikes me as it would be a courtesy to say, no, I don't think so, not on this particular job. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think we've had, one, just, locating us back, and this is, while many of these practices are now consistent with things we do across hiring for multiple roles, right? Procedure we're looking at is for administrative roles. I've had folks where it was clear, and I did do some initial, it doesn't preclude us from doing some of that early communication. And certainly I've had folks, where I reached out to and I was like, are you sure? And anyway, had a little back and forth or communicated back to them that,
But that's you. And if it's somebody else was in the position, that's kind of a problem when it's not part of an SOP, I guess, after last night, so that it's a piece that I would wish we were clear about somewhere. Thanks.
Noah, did you want to add to that for discussion?
No, I had a different question.
Okay.
Or a different ad.
Yeah. I think we've talked about a few things here. I think in terms of proposed, kind of additions, modifications, I don't know if Julie, if there's something you want to suggest. I feel like, I hear that. I think the procedure, our general orientation is trying to cultivate folks and kind of keep them in pools is, kind of what we're working towards in terms of the disposition around hiring processes. But if there was, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Well, it says eliminate all candidates who do not meet the minimum qualifications, line 4 somewhere in this up top. And sort of say, and notify them, that's what I'm thinking. But, whether it's a critical thing or not, that's not incredibly critical, but.
Wouldn't the elimination notify them in as well? Like once they're eliminated, wouldn't they get an email?
But that doesn't say.
Or do they just get taken off?
It doesn't say that. From what they've said is it happens when everybody is eliminated, we have the final candidate. So that was my piece. But.
Any concerns with that?
Just while we're on this, I just think it's not that clear, because sometimes you want to hold somebody in your system because they might qualify for another position that you have coming up and you want to be able to move them over. I do understand, Julianne, your concern about communicating in an efficient and timely way, that feels important, but I'm not sure that we need to bake in when that is. So, wouldn't
that be, wouldn't that be in the hiring toolkit? So we wouldn't see, which I don't know if that's something we need to know, because the hiring process should at least create space for that.
That's
kind of where I'm saying.
It's with people within the system, people coming in, even it just people applying to be
remember, this is for administrators too. This
Right.
policy we're looking at is
Yeah.
for administrators.
Adios.
No, I think your sentiment is right. I just don't think it necessarily needs to be within this policy so descriptive of when that happens. And
Then
Barrett, I would look to you. Is there something within the equity toolkit that talks about like respecting candidates' time, communicating, efficiently and timely?
No, I mean, of course, that's the goal. And, like you said, like sometimes there are reasons why we're like, well, we want to move forward with this. And there's this other opportunity, like, I don't know. And, anytime someone reaches out, then the hiring manager can respond to them. It is tricky to manage though. Like it's really hard to manage. If you think about people who are really underqualified for positions that they apply for, like we're trying to hire, right? Like we're trying to find the right administrator in this case for the job. Like, and everyone only has so much bandwidth. And, so I wouldn't say
That's
that.
fine. I think you're trying to do the right thing and all. And I know you, Barrett, and I know Aaron, and I just want, what has happened when we haven't been explicit in time. So somewhere would you put it in?
Totally. No, I think it's a practice. I think it's a practice like internal thing versus policy procedure.
Right. That's fine. So
and I don't disagree with anything you're saying. Absolutely. Yeah. So, yeah.
I trust you. Okay.
Now, what was the issue you wanted to raise? And then maybe I can summarize where we're at, just from a timing perspective, thinking about the other two topics we want to get to. I think you're muted now.
Thank you. I just wanted to see if we can be specific, and maybe again, this might be a hiring toolkit situation. I'm wondering if we can be specific in the naming of biases, because you can be specific with hiring specifically. Because hiring biases are like discrimination, gender discrimination. And so I'm wondering if that can be specifically written out instead of just saying attention to given unbiased regards. It's down. You just passed it. There in the screening, and I think it's 2. Hold on. It's 1, ensure appropriate screening of candidate applications within attention given to an unbiased regard. So I'm wondering if just the bias that can occur during a hiring process would just be written out so people can see it clearly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just because anything can be a bias. I don't know if that's... Go ahead, Barrett.
No, I wonder if that even goes in the framing under C versus under 1, like so that it names like, kind of the point of the equity hiring toolkit is really, it's really centered around that. And so I wonder if adding a sentence there, Erin, which we could workshop and share back with you in that says basically, which, strives to address bias in hiring, which includes, as you were saying.
Exactly. Yeah.
I like that suggestion. I think it's more of a overarching frame there, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's more just like it's good to always like name what the thing is so that people don't get their own idea of what that might look like.
Right. Yep. Yeah, we can work on that and show that back so that it's in there for first read. And we can discuss. Okay. So just in terms of where we're at, I hear, just back to the policy, there were two proposed, slight modifications, the spelling around locks, and then, in maintaining gender identity and expression. And then here, I think just this last conversation, but correct me if I'm wrong, if I wasn't tracking one, of like the only proposed amendment to to these revisions is what we just discussed with kind of the naming of, possible biases and, Barrett's suggestion about kind of lifting that up into just the kind of framing statement under screening and interviewing. Does that sound? Okay. So So with that, Nyla, if you want to call for, just kind of a motion to, with those amendments, kind of advance, these policies to kind of first read and workshop at the board level.
Okay, so can we make a motion or proposal? Okay. Okay. Can we make a motion to pass this policy on to the board for further comments?
Mm-hmm.
So moved.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I get a motion?
Sure.
That's what I
Okay.
said,
Or
so
a,
moved. Yeah.
okay, thank you.
That's again.
With the amendments. Oh my goodness. Okay, let me say it again so I have that recorded. Can I get a motion to move the policy with its new amendments to the full board for comments and
First
for
reading.
comments and yep. And then
Move the policy forward to the board for first read and workshop as we have amended.
okay, thank you, Julia.
Just following your lead.
And then can I get a second?
I second. Nanette.
Thank you, Mickey. And then Aaron, can you do the count, or can we do the vote count? Okay.
Yeah, just all those in favor. Here, we don't have to do the roll call. You can just raise hands, all those in favor.
Perfect. All those in favor?
Great.
Okay. The 3 voted.
Wonderful. Okay. So I'll include those amendments in the materials we organized for first read and, kind of prep some of these talking points for the workshop on that. So
Perfect. Thank you.
great. So let's turn. So the next 2 are kind of similar. One is focused on, the first one's focused on teacher evaluation. The second is focused on principal evaluation and school leader, principal, assistant principal. So I think the context I would share for that is, these policies and even kind of the attachments. So in the board docs and what I shared in materials were the required plans that were submitted in 2017 to the state to kind of satisfy that requirement. So those were, so there was, I think, I'm not sure what the policies looked like before, but there was definitely an era in the 2010s of kind of in education policy, kind of educator effectiveness, where there was a focus on teacher and leader evaluation systems. And so Maine, some of that was driven by Obama Race to the Top money and things like that at that time. And there were various federal grants, these school improvement grants called SIG grants at the time, of which it had kind of requirements both at the state level and then, at individual district levels to kind of adopt reforms related to that, to the evaluation systems. So much of this is kind of reflective of that era of kind of policy reform and when these requirements were kind of adopted. So, so the policies themselves, and we'll start with the teacher one, is, somewhat limited, right? There's not much to the policy, frankly. And Drummond doesn't even maintain actually like a model policy for these. I did get one from MSMA. So that was kind of where some of the revisions had, but I had Drummond review as well. Their only additional suggestion that's not reflected was, didn't think we needed the paragraph any longer that cites the 2016 policy, the 2016 law and so forth. So they felt like we could strike that, but otherwise it was fine in terms of proposed revisions. So I don't think my opinion, my 2 cents, is there's not much substance to the policy itself, right? The interesting stuff is in the actual documents of the the evaluation system. And so what I'd say about that is, there was the initial conception of kind of this TVAL system, and there was, implementation of that in its first few years. When I joined the district in 2019, there was a working group that had been working, with PEA, to already consider revisions to the process. In large part, people found that the amount of time and energy kind of dedicated to the process was not, particularly for continuing educators, was not worth, was not generating the kinds of supports and dialogue about teaching and learning, that folks found necessary. So they were considering kind of revisions to the process. And then COVID hit. And so we really have kind of been thrown off in some respects, our evaluation, just the rollout of that. So the rollout of all that was kind of initially happening in the context of COVID, and then we had an MOU as part of that year where we didn't do any evaluations, during our hybrid year. So we've been kind of building back. So some of the one of the other attachments reflects kind of what I would describe still as a pilot in the kind of context of the state language of things we've been iterating on. I think we're talking about in the strategic plan this as a potential initiative under our people goal to kind of land these. So our existing required plan still is the one. I mean, we submitted it, understand that it was approved and never once heard more from DOE about it. So we're in alignment. We use the Danielson framework, is a well-known kind of national framework around, kind of teaching and learning as the basis. There had been, so the kind of two things we'd piloted was some revision to, kind of the observation cycles. So we maintained it for probationary teachers, right? That's an important component, the required one scheduled, unscheduled, and then one unscheduled observation. But then for most continuing contract teachers, engaging them in a cycle of kind of goal setting and thinking about kind of the points of contact that they're working on. So really thinking about it as more of kind of professional learning plan. That being said, there's definitely criteria if there are concerns about a teacher performance of kind of, there's a mechanism to move them to kind of directed, the directed growth cycle, I think is the language that we have there. So that's what we've been directed learning cycle. So there's mechanisms if there are concerns right around performance to kind of re-engage in a cycle of observation and feedback in kind of that traditional sense. One other thing that just to name is that we're also kind of coming out of COVID. There was a work group looking at the Danielson framework and thinking about how to embed equity language in it. And there was an element, it was mostly focused on domain 4. And so there was an additional kind of indicator added that, talks about reflection and action on sustaining equity literacy. So there was, a limited, an effort to kind of think about how that shows up in kind of the notion of professional responsibilities, right? As a way, and that was, in coming in 2020 when we had a work group that was kind of looking at that. So I think we've been, advancing these efforts, and I think there is, some value in, what we've done, but I think there's a process for us to go through to kind of land this, to kind of formalize it. And then, in the next year or two, depending on how we sequence this kind of in the context of our strategic plan, to then kind of land all of these pieces and bring it forward for a full updated proposal. I would say the other thing I'd add before opening up for a kind of conversation and questions is never in my time, I don't know if really ever it was implemented, and certainly with all the changes in state assessment, regardless of one's beliefs about it, on a practical level, it has not been possible to include student outcomes in the evaluation measures. And so that functionally has not been, I'm not sure, it has never in my time been a component of the evaluation cycle. It is only focused on the professional practice side of things. So anyway, just a little bit of context about the policy, less about the policy and more just around kind of our process. So that part, the only thing that's kind of on the committees, is the revisions to the policy, because those are older. So we could adopt those revisions to the policy. There's no action associated with kind of the evaluation system at this point. We're still kind of developing, and that'll be something we bring forward kind of along the timelines we lay out with the strategic plan. Okay. So discussion on this one, just remember, we'll try and hit also, it'll be a similar conversation on the administrator side. We're in a somewhat similar place, but I want to speak to that a little bit. So just on the evaluation one, questions, thoughts? Julianne?
I think there's an incredibly important statement, the second sentence in the introduction, that the board really needs to be aware of, where it says it is the board's responsibility to ensure the sufficient administrative time and energy are expended to supervise and evaluate. And I think that's the teachers, and I think that's on both sides. Whether it's developing a program or however Danielson is implemented and the cycle is implemented. But I think that is something that, as we look at the overall system and the overall way we organize school, that if we want to make sure we know what's going on in the classroom and make sure that it's of quality, it's 40 years of experience tells me that being evaluated and being the evaluator is incredibly time consuming because of the nature of the other things you have to do. So I really just have to emphasize that as we talk about it, because I helped develop the TVAL for the school district I worked in, and it's, Danielson's a great one, but it takes time, and it takes time just to even know it. And the PD necessary to understand it is significant. I wanted to make that statement.
Yeah, that was part of what led to the revisions. It was understood, that it was because of the time involved, and felt like appropriate investments of time in probationary staff, and with that, something still for us to kind of evaluate, even in the conversation, but for all teachers, and it wasn't all teachers every year for continuing contract, but was still the lift was significant, and that was what led even after a few years of implementation of it feeling unsustainable initially. Other comments or questions about either the policy and the proposed revisions there? Let me just first see if there are any questions specifically about the proposed changes to the policy, just so we can kind of clear that and see if we want to advance that. And then if there are other kind of comments or discussion around kind of the teacher evaluation system. So first, any questions about the proposed revision to the policy about the educator evaluation and professional growth? Okay. Any other questions or discussion just around the teacher evaluation system?
I have just one question. Was the evaluations that were being done before, were they not being kept or collected confidential? Sorry, it says, were they not being kept in files? That's what I meant.
I would have,
because that's a new ad. I'm just wondering if that wasn't being done before.
It is different than the language here. I think it was. I don't know. I don't know, Barrett, if you've seen in older personnel files, but I don't know. I guess I would be surprised.
No, it's digital now. We use a learning, management platform that helps with this. I don't know what was done before 2016. I imagine it was some level of digital as well. But I don't know. I don't know is that I've seen pre that. I'd have to ask and do some digging.
Well, it's good it's on here.
It is good that it's on there, because it's probably the previous ones are probably in a file with a principal that didn't get past that point. And if a principal left, really very hard to keep count of all the paperwork back when the paper was happening. And it very slow change out of paper across the board, I'm sure. So I hope we have a good system now, Barrett, as far as recording this and setting it up and some standardized things that are actually electronic.
Oh yeah, no, it lives in the Frontline system. Currently, we use Frontline to manage that, and so it allows both the person being evaluated and the evaluator to be kind of in the rubric. And we may look at different platforms for that are going to even make it even more accessible and easier to manage, because it still is a lot. But yeah, it's all managed within that system, and I have a team. I have a couple team members who really help support the evolution of this, but one person in particular who really supports administrators to make sure they have the right people on their list, and all of those kind of logistics that go with this. Yeah, we have it's takes some management.
It's hard for administrators too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think even with the reduced scope, and particularly, I mean, my context has been over just the past couple of years with all the staffing challenges and that kind of thing. It's we have not hit 100% in terms of the evaluation goals. I'm curious, Tim, just knowing you kind of in your third year here with PPS, just any experience, and we're not working on the evaluation system here, but just even were you? Did you get your observations done? Not throwing shade here, but just the reality, and any reflections from your perspective as an educator.
This is the second school that I've used the Danielson at. It doesn't feel useful to me as a teacher. It feels like a thing that's happening to me, but that's just kind of a personal feeling about it. Not necessarily the way Portland has implemented it, but just the framework feels like a thing that happens to teachers. And I've been evaluated twice in 2.5 years, I think. And I had no idea that those documents were on file. So I'm happy to see that they're spelled out here on C and E. Because I would be curious to go back and actually see what was written about me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it should be all available. There shouldn't be anything outside in terms of the evaluation context outside of what's available to you in Frontline. And we know we use Frontline now. I know that's not the most well-loved platform for this, so that we're considering evolving into some more friendlier tools, but know that even technology is better than the hard copy, but it hasn't solved all things. So, okay, thanks, Tim. Okay, if there's more discussion on this, maybe we, if we want to take a motion and kind of advance the proposed revisions to the educator evaluation policy, and then we can move to the kind of administrator evaluation for our last. So Nyla, do you want to facilitate that one?
Yeah, Julianne, did you have another question?
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment, and from what Tim said was completely understood, that I noticed in reading the GVAL system, there, instead of using the Danielson as a tool for improving teaching, it was, it's used as an evaluation system, which is it being at you. And so the idea of teachers helping each other without evaluation on aspects of the Danielson is, I think, the benefit of it. I think the value. I think Tim's absolutely right. It's a cumbersome thing that's done at people. So I just really feel that in your evaluation of how the system works, that consider the part that is actually useful, where teachers help teachers in any particular way. So
yeah.
that was my.
And I think that was a spirit of a lot of the revisions, to kind of move away from just the formal prescribed like observation cycles, as they happen. I mean, where it's required for probationary teachers and appropriate. I mean, and we have probationary teachers who are coming with significant experience. I think probationary teachers often assumes new teachers, right? And that's not necessarily the case, right? Like in Tim's context, he was coming with experience, right? Having been a teacher elsewhere. But that was the spirit, I think, of the continuing contract piece, is moving out of just that kind of scripted domain with all that energy to try and allow for peer-to-peer or various other ways to kind of, be thinking about the growth of practice, and not just from an evaluation cycle. But there's, cleanup of that to go. Okay, thanks, Nylat. If you want to. Didn't we lost Mickey? Seems like we lost Mickey.
Yeah, she was coming in and out. She might not have internet where she is. Or it might be bad connection. Okay.
Are we going to be able to do a second? I will, with just the two of us.
I guess I can second my own motion. No. Okay.
I can, if he comes back, how about we wait until she comes back?
Should we text her?
Yeah, that's Arizona.
So we'll talk the principal one, and then we can do them as a package at the end. So.
Yep, that sounds good. Thank you.
So, I mean, I don't have a ton to say about just the policy piece of the administrator one. It's very similar, to the teacher one in terms of just the language of the policy itself, and, in terms of the changes and the rationale for the changes. So this is, there wasn't any specific legislative. It was just kind of updating it because it had been a while, and use that other one. They had the same feedback of kind of eliminating the paragraph that talks about the 2016 Educator Effectiveness Law. So, so that's, we can see if there's any questions about the policy itself. We can update that. But I think process-wise, we've also been delayed. We had aspired similarly after the working group had worked on the TEVAL, the teacher evaluation system, of revising what had been, the principal evaluation system. And I think for me coming in, and we've been through a similar journey of kind of evaluations. We had a MOU where we didn't have it. And so, didn't do evaluations for a year, during COVID, similar to, for teachers and so forth. And then coming out of that, over the last year, we did some work to revise both. In this case, we were really interested in revising the framework. So I think I found the framework as I used it in my first few years supervising principals, to be confusing, not aligned to, kind of what we're about at this point. I mean, it didn't mention equity anywhere and a leader's role in promoting equity and things like that. So it felt very outdated and not relevant for our current context, and didn't kind of center some of the instructional leadership and kind of culture building work. So, we worked with a team of leaders from PAA to kind of revise the rubric throughout last spring. So this year is really kind of a pilot of the new rubric. It's certainly dense, represents a lot in terms of the work leaders are responsible for, which is, authentic. But that's part of kind of what we're curious about how to manage that. And then we tried to kind of clarify the prior process. Just tried to streamline it to make it more clear. There were various forms that you felt repetitive and duplicative and things like that, kind of in the original PVAL submission. Again, we submitted something, totally in compliance with kind of the state statutes and expectations, all that. But in practice, some of that felt just inefficient and redundant. So we tried to clean all of that up and had just kind of a clearer process. And one of the changes that we're also evaluating is moved the kind of goal setting process out of the in the prior rubric and so forth. You actually got assessed on your progress towards your goals, and we felt like that was not. We engage in goal setting, right? And that's a structure and a vehicle to kind of focus and to drive professional learning, but to then have been evaluated on the goals didn't feel, apt. So that was one of the changes and helped us kind of clean up the process. So we're in our first year of kind of implementation of kind of this revised plan. Leaders have all done their initial self-assessments, which would typically only happen for a new leader coming in, because you would have your final summative as kind of the anchor, right? Where you're talking about these are your growth areas for next year, right? And having that conversation. And then we have a mid-year conversations, and those are coming up. You should try and catch Mickey while she's here for the action item. But and then so we have those coming up in January. We'll be going through those for that kind of reflection for the first time. So I think we are, there's been both positive feedback about the language in the rubric, in the principal effectiveness rubric, just in terms of it feeling more relevant and connected to the work that leaders feel passionate about, I would say, and a reaction of like, seeing it all written down in that way is kind of like overwhelming of kind of what they're responsible for as well. But that's part of the reality. So we're in kind of process of our first year of kind of using those tools. Julianne?
I would like to move for a sending of the teacher evaluation policy on to the board for discussion, first read. Second, anywhere?
Mickey, we're trying
to catch up. Mickey's here.
Yeah.
I keep going off and on. I have no idea.
No.
I know. That's why we kind of jumped out of there. I want to make sure.
All right. Yes. I moved. A second. Yes.
Thank you. Can we get a vote?
Yep. Done. Okay.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Why don't we keep going? Before we talk more, just discussion about the principal one. Did anybody have questions about the policy language as it related to the administrator policy? The administrator evaluation? Again, it's very similar to the teacher one. Okay. If there are no questions, maybe let's go ahead and do that action, and then we can just, kind of discuss a little bit just in terms of orientation to the principal evaluation. So, yeah, Nyla, do you want to do that for the administrator one?
Consideration and action to move the evaluation of administrators to the full board. Can I get a motion? Okay, thank you for seconding it. Mick, oh my God. Mickey.
It's okay. It's early in the morning.
Can we get a vote to move it?
Right.
Okay, moved. Perfect.
So, yeah, questions, discussion about the administrator evaluation. And Barrett was, it was Barrett and I kind of representing kind of the management as we did that process. So Barrett, chime in, anything you'd share.
It's a massive tool, but it's really awesome. It's really good. We worked really hard on it. And feels like it, holds a very high bar and standard, and no one could get, I think we have a 4-point scale in that. It's not possible, right? And because there's going to be room for growth. So and I like how it's sort of just different themes. It came a long way from where we started with that, but I think it's a very powerful, very useful rubric.
Sarah?
Yeah, just wanted to echo, like it's really cool because you can see the behaviors change through the 4-point system. So it just like seems really strong and a great tool. So just wanted to thank you for the time that you put into it.
I also echo the appreciation. This looks really complex, which it probably should be.
And there is, I just gave the high level of the Danielson. There is kind of like similar 4-point scales, right, related to the Danielson rubric. So that's just the summary, and that's even just a couple pages, right? So the experience that Tim was referring to, there's a similar kind of document that ideally is intended to be instructive of kind of like at the different levels what the actions would look like. But Julianne, you have a comment?
Yeah, it's good. I particularly like the fact that under school culture, under measurement examples, stakeholders, students, faculty, district staff, kind of that 360 view is I feel that's quite good. Probably as a teacher, it's scary to have that sort of thing happen to teachers too, and I don't know if PA would let it happen, but to have that kind of a certain piece in there. The thing I didn't see was you said equity was in there, and I'm trying to look to see where equity is. I'm looking at domain 4, and that would be school culture, I would think, or is it somewhere else? Because I did not see that in there, which since we said we were putting that in there.
Are you referring to on the Danielson rubric?
No, I'm talking about the administrators.
Yeah.
First one.
Yeah, the first domain, this diversity, equity, and belonging champion, and all of the kind of indicators underneath that.
Never mind.
I mean, it's a 19-page rubric. It's easy to get lost in.
Well, I was looking at domain 4 because of culture in that piece.
Oh, the school culture. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just looking. Well, I'm looking at domain 1 in the rubric for domain 1, professional growth.
Oh, you're looking at the, I think you're referring to the old rubric.
Am I?
Yeah, that was part of the whole P-Val package. So here, I can call it up, which you're referring to.
Okay. Yeah, that's probably what I was looking at. Yes. Which I thought was really great because it was so specific and detailed. And all right, never mind.
Yeah, this is the old one that we revised.
Yes, I see it. I see the new one. I see the new one. I think I must have not thought it was there because of the blank page. And I didn't get past the blank page between the two. So yeah. That is as it is.
Yeah.
If it's better than the last one, correct.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it. So we'll send it forward and I'll look at it later.
Yeah. And again, this is all just informational at some point once, as we kind of align, our focus around kind of observation and feedback from really this culture of growth, right? That's one of the, kind of pieces in that's something that historically has been one of the TNT piece survey that we do, the stakeholder survey, observation and feedback and evaluation are typically from kind of all employee groups, some of our lowest rated domains. So that's one of the things that we're thinking about and resonates with some of the findings in the kind of organizational diagnostic of just like stronger cultures and routines around like professional learning and growth and support in those ways. And so some of the ways we're talking about how that might live in kind of the strategic plan as kind of a focus on that. So I think that's how I'm thinking about, this kind of pilot that we've had in place a little bit around the T-Val, this year's pilot for P-Val, in alignment with that, that'll give us a kind of trajectory to kind of formalize all of that, and, have kind of the full, a full robust plan. Julianne?
I was wondering if we will, I know we'll approve the continual contracts on individuals that pass. But my question is, will we get a sense of how the process of how the evaluations are going this year come, summertime? After it's been through the whole cycle, how did this one go? I don't think it's part of our first year plan, is it?
No, I mean, there's a component. We will be doing progress monitoring around leadership development. So at the leadership level, we'll talk about it, and we will revisit it before we come forward with the. This may happen in an executive session, right? But before we come forward to talk about the.
But the same thing with teachers. If how many teachers actually did, without having to ask which particular principal did it, how many teachers actually went through some process of evaluation in the course of the year? Mm-hmm. It would be useful, I think, just to get a sense of what's going on.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, we can do that. Yeah, that would be good as we think about the probationary renewal kind of periods. Will be the time to kind of have that discussion. Okay. All right. If there isn't any other discussion on these, I think we've accomplished our action items. And so we'll prepare for these at January 2nd, quick turnaround. Is our next board meeting. That'd be first read and workshop. So we'll get the materials prepared for that, as we kind of talked about, specifically more on the hiring and the hiring policy and procedure. And then next month we'll come back together. Our next meeting is January 23rd. So by, kind of the middle of the month, ideally, I think we were targeting before Martin Luther King Day, having materials to you to review. We're looking at kind of we'll have Barrett back in the mix and maybe some other team members, because we'll be looking at the, one, in terms of required plans, our affirmative action plan, and then in terms of the policies, the affirmative action policy, as well as the employee, harassment and discrimination policy, which is one we've been wanting to update for a bit. So, so that'll be the focus of our January policy committee meeting.
I think Tyler Schwaller will probably join because of the connection to the student policy. Richard Moore will join as our affirmative action officer, and Julia Hazel, provided there isn't any snow, because that is the snow date for something she's already booked for, but she plans to attend as well. So you'll have a whole bunch of my team.
And so that's, I think, January 23rd, I think, is the date that we have for that. It's the existing date. So our 5:30 to 7.
That sounds really good. Oh, did you have anything else to say?
Nope.
Okay. All right. So can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting? Thank you, Mickey. Can I get a second? All right. Vote to adjourn the meeting.
All right. In favor.
Okay.
6:45 Eastern time.
Okay. Yeah. I actually, my laptop didn't change. Thank God. I have that reference. Okay. So the Policy and Curriculum Committee meeting is adjourned at 6:55 p.m. Eastern time. Thank you, everybody, and have a good night. For me, it's day, so I will be enjoying the day now.
Okay. Happy holiday to everyone.
Good. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, and I'll
Thanks,
see
everybody.
y'all